Hi guys, hope you've had. Ooh, goddamn, this is so awkward. It's been so long. Hi guys, hope you've had a great summer so far, and I hope you're ready to do some more work. I hope you all got this book by now, and I hope you've read it. If not, I suggest you read the whole thing. Honestly, I suggest you read it more than once. It's a really great source of guidance to help you in anything related to this qualification. I already gave you guys a time plan a while ago. I posted it on the Google Classroom. It was a photo that basically showed a timeline of when to submit certain things in the production log. So we want to try to follow that roughly. By now you should be getting your feedback on your proposals. So please go through the comments carefully from me and Miss Fatin and Ms. Zaina and see if you have any questions. So then now you have a month to work on the planning review. So the plan that you all have made, like the Gantt charts and whatever, that's really good. But it's also the point of the assessment objective number 2 is, so I think you all should have the assessment objective number 1 ticked, which is choosing the topic, aims and objectives, title, whatever. These are subject to change if you want to improve your ideas and stuff. The second one is the planning and development. You'll get credit for what you do in the production log. So you have like 4 different submissions. Every couple of weeks you have to submit a new planning review, mid-project review. The point of it is to see where you're at that stage, to see that you're meeting with your supervisor between each submission, to see if you are using your supervisor's comments, which are optional. So basically we give you comments. You can choose to follow them or not. But you have to say what our comments were, and you have to then say, do you wish to continue and to follow this? Do you want to follow the advice or not? With justifying any of your decisions, you should get back the proposals. Okay, so you have our comments from me, Ms. Fatin, and Ms. Zaina, and then we should have some sort of contact, whether it's a phone call or a video call, because obviously we can't meet in person, where we discuss your project so far for the planning review. Why does my voice keep doing that? So then we can have a discussion on what you think of our comments, if you want anything clarified, so that you can then write it down based on our meeting. So whenever you see in the production log a summary of comments from my supervisor, they should be meeting based. So they shouldn't be I'm not going to give you written comments other than the ones that we've written in the production log for the proposal. After that, we're just going to keep meeting in person, and me just giving you, and Ms. Fatin, giving you some advice on what you should do next, what should you, just like a conversation, and then you should take notes of things that we say, and then write them in the planning review. So that's the point. Of the production log, you get points for the assessment objective number 2, which is the planning part. Even if your plan at the end, the Gantt chart, the one that you're going to attach as an appendix, wasn't perfect, it's subject to change anyway. If you've read this, it tells you that at the mid-project review is when you review your plan. If you want to change it for the upcoming months, that's your chance of changing it with justification. If you feel like now you have a clearer idea of what you've accomplished, what you think you're going to accomplish, and how long it's going to take you, I suggest that you start writing from now and taking notes of things that you're gonna gather. So you have to form your argument, try to think of exactly what you're gonna cover. Basically, you have to do a lot of research for now, and try to manage your time to not get overwhelmed. Don't spend your whole time doing that. Try to enjoy your summer as well. Remember, it's like roughly 90 hours of working time that you should work on this. So don't overwhelm yourself. Try to do as much research as you can. Check if all your resources are reliable. I think the best motivator is to read this book. It just tells you exactly what to do. So I think it's a great guide. Basically, if you remember the exemplar and what he did, was he wrote paragraphs summarizing each drug and what it does, side effects, whatever. So it's good to summarize your data that way, so that when writing comes, you can just copy and paste the paragraphs that you've already written and paste them in your report, and then the writing is going to be a lot faster. If you do this summer stage really well, writing is going to be a lot easier later on. So yeah, at the mid-project review, which is in mid-September, so during this time you have to do a lot of research, and then we have the planning review end of July, halfway between the mid-project and now. Basically, it's for the planning part, to see if you've developed in this past month after talking to your supervisor? Have you changed something? If so, tell us what it is, justifying why you've changed it. You basically have to justify anything that you edit. Try to aim to finish the majority of your research. Try to find all the resources that you're going to need before the mid-project review. That doesn't mean that your research is going to end. I think even as you write, you might think of something that you need to reference, so then you have to do some research and then you find a new source. That's completely fine. And then the idea is after the mid-project review in September is when you start writing properly, like start to finalize your report. But I suggest that you also start writing from now, like just mini paragraphs. So my main advice is that you find a book, right? And you find a certain chapter that you think is interesting and is applicable to your report. You take that chapter, you read it, you understand it, you take what you want from it, and then you paraphrase it into a Word document, say, right? 2-3 paragraphs that you've written, or even 1 paragraph that you've written based on the data that you took from this book. And you also reference it. This is how you take notes as well. You write what you took from that resource. So then when you have to write your report at the end, you take that paragraph that you've already paraphrased. You can either copy and paste it, or you can then paraphrase it even more again and write it down. I would advise you to start drafting so many things while not losing the resource. Because if you lose the reference, like the book, or you write this paragraph that you've taken this information from a certain book, but you didn't write the book, then you lose it. It's going to take a while to find it again. It's going to get messy and it's going to waste a lot of your time. So try to be as organized as possible with your diary, if you have a diary or a note copybook, something to write everything down. Take notes, make sure that your argument is clear, that you have enough sources. That's basically what you're aiming for. This is the idea of planning a project. If you plan it well, it will go well. That's the theory. The slides of your presentation that you're going to make later on, we'll discuss the presentation in due time. And any planning notes, any extra information that you want to attach, you can attach it to the appendix, but it's optional, and try to not have it too detailed. Just like enough to show that you've done some more planning or whatever you want to attach to the appendix. The idea is also, I think I've already told you this, but it's very, 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 very important, is the production log and the journey of the whole project is as important as the final product. Like, say you didn't really do the production log as accurately or as properly as you should, and you're just saying, oh, I'll just fix it in the report. The report will be less than 40% of the whole thing. So don't just rely on the idea that my report will be fine, because they need to see how you've evolved from your initial idea onto this report. They need to see this journey. And the journey is as important as the report, if not more important. So be very careful with understanding the journey. So some people can have a poor report or not a great report, but then the journey and the proof and the evidence that they've provided is really good. So then they might have a better mark than someone with a really great report, but the journey is not, there's no evidence of how he reached that report. So yeah, just be careful of that. Also, no dual accreditation, so be careful of that. Basically what that means is, if you're writing this whole report, you cannot use that report that you write to use it for anything else, to submit it for anything else. So say you go to uni and you decide to do a dissertation, something similar to this, you can't use the report from your IPQ. You also cannot use your report in the IPQ to use it for any other submission that you have to submit. You can't use your work that you've done for the IPQ, it's just for the IPQ. So with the log, you have to justify everything you're doing. So any decision that you make, any tweak that you've made, you have to justify it. If we see that you've done something and you've evolved from this bit to this bit without any justification, you will lose credit for that. So try to be very careful, and whenever you say something, try to think of me asking you, why have you done that? Why have you done that? Just imagine someone asking you why with any decision that you're making. Explain why, what your thought process is. All these details should be added in the log, not the report. So be careful. Do not write all of your writing and your thinking and your on why you did something in the report. The report should be as formal as possible. Just a piece of work that someone reads to understand something. I don't want to, as I'm reading the report, to understand how your process was in reading and writing the report. So be careful, there's a difference in that. That's why the production log is a part of this assessment, is for you to explain exactly what happened in the journey for you to reach this report. So any part of that should all be in the log. So an example of justifying everything that you're doing, say you've chosen to summarize your data in a table. Explain why you've chosen a table. other than anything else. So you could have just written it down. Anything that you do, justify it. It could be as silly as picking a table over, or a pie chart over a table. Why have you done that? Why have you... Try to think of everything and try to make the production log as detailed as possible. Also, if you tweaked your title, that's very important. So you started... Obviously, it's very normal for your title to keep changing. It's never going to be the same as you've picked it from your record of initial ideas. You're going to start to make it more specific, more... You decided to change it a bit. You didn't find enough sources, so you changed it into something else because you found more sources with this, or you understood it a bit better, so you thought this title would be better. Whatever the reason is, you have to say it. You can't just change the title without any explanation. You could also keep saying that if it was from a comment from your supervisor, then mention it. My supervisor suggested that I tweak my title to be more specific, so I decided to, you're supposed to say stuff like that. With the research, so hopefully now you're doing a lot of digging deep into finding sources that are necessary for your project. Try to reach, you already know this, try to find academic and professional sources, such as books and journals. They're much better than websites. It also depends on your topic, but still try to aim for reliable sources and try to go deeper into your research. Don't just go on Google and find the first couple of links and that's it. Try to find something that's really reliable. Some of these superficial media, we call it, or internet sites, they can be unreliable, or it can be very difficult to validate if it is reliable. Wikipedia is a good start, but that's it. Try to not rely on Wikipedia unless you want to explain why you think this particular Wikipedia page is reliable. A tip is you go on the Wikipedia page or check the references that they've used. There are so many ways to review any website, as I've already discussed it before, even لما كنا بالصف, is if to see who the author is, who the organization is, the text itself, is it actually considering everything? So if you remember the critical writing report that I've attached into the Google Classroom, and even in the last video I've explained how the person writing the report was trying to be very critical. It was about nuclear energy, and he was going on about the advantages and disadvantages and going through. That's how you write critically, is you think of every certain perspective, every side of the argument. So you try not to be persuasive. If the author is writing stuff down and they're just trying to convince you of what they're trying to say, and you can tell that maybe this source, you find two sources, one is actually discussing the disadvantages of this specific thing, and then another source that's not even mentioning them, that means that source might not be as reliable as the one who's mentioned the disadvantages as well. You should already know the differences between primary and secondary sources. Primary is something that is not analyzed, it's just pure raw data that no one has done much with. So even if you collected that data yourself. So it could be an interview, a questionnaire, or an experiment. So the experiment isn't really valid to any of you, but it is something that you could be doing in the university. So basically what you could do is you have a hypothesis of something. So you say, because I did civil engineering, so let's go with a concrete example. So if you use a certain type of concrete, let's say the hypothesis is it breaks at this specific point. So to test this hypothesis, to see if it's right or wrong, you conduct an experiment. You explain what you're doing in your experiment, what are your assumptions, and then you do the experiment, you take note of the results, you mention the results, you discuss the results, you compare your results to secondary data. It's very important. You can't write a report and fully rely on primary data without comparing it to secondary data, without doing some sort of analysis. So that's how you do it. None of you is going to do any experiment, so that's not really applicable. But some of you might consider doing an interview or a questionnaire. There's also a lot of help in this book. Again, I repeat. But interviews and questionnaires are considered primary data. So whatever interview or questionnaire that you do and you collect this information, you need to justify it with a secondary source. You can't just rely on an interview or questionnaire. So if you talk to a certain doctor and they tell you without finding this piece of information from a book or a published reliable source, then you can't really use it in your project or you will lose credit. So be careful with that. If you do conduct an interview or a questionnaire, you have to assess the risks. So you have to see if the topic itself is sensitive. If we're in a COVID-19 situation, you could be unable to conduct an interview. Where would it be conducted? That kind of thing. Show evidence of all of that in your log. So if you do conduct an interview, say, you have to mention the risks that you've thought about, the questions that you've asked in the interview, preferably all the answers. You write all the raw data down. It's just proof that you've done this interview. So then after you have gathered this information, you have to analyze it. So with a questionnaire, if you remember, I did this questionnaire with you guys. So I started with from which AS class are you from, but I could have done it with which rosary school are you from, Majid Hammam or Shmaysani or whatever. Which country are you from? I could have done it in Jordan, could have done it in the UK, could have done it in another country, and then from the analysis you can then say people from Jordan are more likely to be da 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 because of this. You can then do pie charts with this. So it would be fair if you gathered a large number of students to fill this questionnaire. The larger the number, the more reliable your data will be. So 80% of males have Instagram, while 90% of females have Instagram. So you can then try to find a secondary source that explains why females are more likely to have Instagram accounts. So you can then discuss it into this could be the reason why, but you have to be very careful because you have to basically Google the difference between correlation and causation. They're very two different things, and you have to be very careful with analyzing and justifying your information that you're gathering. But basically how you analyze data from here, you use the patterns in graphs and pie charts, and it's quantitative, it's quantities, it's numbers, it's yes no questions. That kind of these kinds of questions they're easier to analyze. So as I said, 45% of this did that, 90% did this. So it's like easy to analyze and then to describe. And to make sense of what these showed you, you need secondary data. Now, what I didn't have in this specific questionnaire is an extra question that was an open-ended question. So an open-ended question would have been like, if you answered yes in question 3, do you think that using Instagram contributes to you feeling down after using it? And then you can have another question of asking, why do you think, if you've answered yes, why do you think Instagram contributes to you feeling down after using it? So you have now an open end where people could just say, oh, it's because I feel insecure about myself when I see other people living their lives, whatever. Or you can say fear of missing out, right? I don't know. So like you get different you get different answers, but the analyzing the open-ended question, which could be so many worded answers, is a lot harder than analyzing the numerical numbers. So with the numerical ones, you can just say 45% of people said this, whereas with this one, you need to find some sort of context or structure. So how many people mentioned the idea of a fear of missing out? So then you can say most people discussed that it makes them a bit depressed because they have a fear of missing out, or most people are insecure because they see others living their best life, whatever. And then you can do this analysis of social media and its effect on people, whatever. So you can use then the questionnaire as a way to describe or to analyze and to help think and yeah, it helps you understand your research, but as long as you need a secondary source to justify your primary sources. So you can do a full research just fully based on secondary data. If you do wish to do a primary research, it's good for you as a starting point to where you want to go with your research. So if, like I said, with an interview, if you want to learn more about it, you can then ask the person that you're interviewing, do you have a book that you suggest? Or they give you ideas as well. If you're talking to a certain expert, they give you ideas to go research even further into your topic on things that you wouldn't have considered researching. So it's a good thing to do that kind of thing. But it could be time consuming. There are certain risks. So if you wish to not do a primary research, that's completely fine. So yeah, there's a difference between quantitative and qualitative. If you remember, I did mention that primary data is usually quantitative, whereas secondary data is more qualitative. But even primary data can also be sometimes qualitative, especially with an interview, since it's a lot of words, and then with an open-ended question in a questionnaire. But mostly they should be quantitative with primary data. So yeah, what you can do with the secondary data, remember to always check if your resources are reliable. You should already have the table to check if a certain source is reliable or not. It's good to have in your bibliography as well at the end, mentioning which of these sources that you've added in your bibliography, if they're reliable or not, if they're primary data or not. You can choose to add all the sources that you've used, even if you haven't referenced them directly in your report, but you can say, I've actually used this Wikipedia page because I thought it was a really good initial start to my research. But you are aware that it is not reliable because the author is unknown, or because the references weren't great, or because the language was persuasive at times, it wasn't as critical. You can discuss it, but then justify why you still used it, because you thought it helped guide you even further. Okay, another thing that you should be careful about is plagiarism. So you should know what plagiarism means by now. Be very careful not to plagiarize anything. Any source that you find, you have to reference everything. Everything should be referenced. Anything you use, even if you paraphrase it, even if you change the wording, you still need to reference it. So any idea that you take that's not yours, you read from a certain book that told you a certain piece of information, even if you know this piece of information, you have to back it up, right? You have to have secondary data. So you have to always reference. Even if you've heard something before about a certain piece of information, you need to find a good reference for it. You can't just be like, oh, I already knew this from before. I remember, as I told you before, I repeat this because it's a very important piece of information. I had to reference that fire started thousands of years ago. We know that humans created fire thousands of years ago. Could be more, I don't know. But I couldn't just say that. I needed a reference, a certain website that said that humans discovered fire a certain number of years, BC, whatever. It could be a piece of information as simple as that, but you need to reference it. So be very careful. Try to reference everything. That's why you can have really big bibliography at the end. Now, with the referencing, you can choose any style you want, as long as you're consistent. So it could be, I advise you the Harvard reference style, which I told you already, is because it's formal, it's easy to use, it's at the end, the bibliography is alphabetically ordered. If you use Word document, it can do everything for you automatically. So I highly recommend that. But if you choose to do the APA, which I think is a numerical kind of system, it's also accepted. As long as it's consistent, it does not matter. You can do in text. So as with the Harvard referencing, you do the brackets and then the author and the year. You can do with the numbers, it's just the brackets and the number. Or you could also have footnotes. So with the footnotes, you have the number at the top. So you have the words and then the number at the top, 1, 2, 3, whatever. And then you have the footnote at the end. You can also insert footnotes on Word and they insert them for you automatically. So let's say I want to add a footnote over here. Go to references and insert footnote. Then you go down and this is where you write down what the source is from. If it's a link, if it's whatever. It immediately goes to the end of the page, moving these to the next page. So you can add another one over here. Have another one. You get the point. So then you have with the bibliography, it can contain references that you haven't used. So even like you haven't used in the Harvard referencing or the number referencing, but it is a resource that helped you formulate ideas. You can add it, and you can also have an annotated bibliography, or you can have certain sources that you want to talk more about and discuss if they're reliable or not, and you can annotate them and explain more about this specific resource. I highly recommend that you do that kind of thing. Okay, now with the writing, try to be consistent with the font, with the style and size. Don't use a style that's really complex to look at or read. Times New Roman or Arial are recommended. Don't have the font too small or too large, so around 12 to 14 is good. 11 and less is too small. And think about the page formatting and the layout. So be careful about how the paragraphs are looking. Don't have paragraphs that are too long, too short, and try to have it look nice. The margins, try not to avoid having them too small. Just use the regular Word formatting. Also, pretend that you're writing to an intelligent or non-specialist of the topic. So you have to explain your thinking. So you don't have to explain very basic information. So if you're discussing an equation, you don't have to explain math basics, but you have to explain what this equation is about. Pretend I don't know anything about the equation, but I know the skills of how to write an equation. Try not to repeat yourself. If you have a certain argument that you want to discuss it here and there, that goes with the planning as well and how you want to lay out your whole report. Try not to repeat or babble on, just like information that's not really important, so be careful. Also, signposts and connectives are very important and you'll get a lot of credit for them. So they're very useful tools to use when writing. These are such as although and however. You need to have a logical flow of ideas and you have to have 1 point per paragraph. So when you transition from paragraph to paragraph, it's good to use the connectives. And you try to show the development of your research. So at the beginning, it shows that you're just very superficial, and then the deeper you go into the report, it's showing that you're going deeper and deeper and deeper into your knowledge, into the knowledge around that topic, and it shows that you're going that you're gaining some information that you don't just get from a Wikipedia page. So section headings or subheadings are very important. So if you get any book that's published, like not a novel, and you go to the context page, or a journal actually, an article from a journal, you can see here with this book, so you have this main heading, then you have this chapter 1, which is called Setting the Scene, and then you have the subheading in chapter 1, introduction of the chapter, and then subheadings, other subheadings, right? And then you start with a new section with its own other subsections, you see? I think with you, you will have the introduction as chapter 1, introduction. Chapter 2 can be argument 1. Actually, I can also use the IPQ book for that. So if you see, you have the introduction as one section, and then you have what is the IPQ, the process involved, how am I independent? These are subheadings, and then you have the project management skills starting out, another section. So it's divided into, the whole book is divided into 5 sections. With your report, because it's obviously smaller than this book, then you have smaller sections, smaller subheadings. You can also use the sections and the subheadings and the formatting. It's like on Word.
Now I want to show you how to use the headings and subheadings over here. So this is the title. So let's just highlight it and then say it's the title. Then you have this as a first heading, so heading number 1. Then this is also heading. I think you can do it this way as well, yeah. Then this, heading 1. Heading 1. You can do that to the whole thing. So let's pretend you want to talk more about the aim, right? You want to, let's say you add a fake subheading called process. Make it into heading number 2. So now you have a section and then a subheading. You can, after that, go insert page break. Then you can insert, go to references, table of content, and then you'll get like sections, and then you get the subheadings as well. Now say you want to change how they look like, right? You can go back to home, you can do change styles, you can do whatever style you wish to use. Let's say we pick the, I don't know. So yeah, let's stay with the one that I had, for example, but you can pick whatever you want. Now you can change it up a bit. Let's say I want to have all the headings have a certain color. So you can do modify, change size. Let's say you want it italic. Press OK. Say you want to edit the second heading. Orange. Say OK. There you go. So all the subheadings will be orange.
The bibliography is not counted in the word count. So the 5,000 words should be excluding the bibliography. Try to divide these words, the word count, like I've given you the guide from Birmingham University, the writing guide. You should go through that as well. That's really helpful. Even the Southampton guides into writing. But usually you should have, so like the way, even for planning, you can say, I plan on writing 10% of my word count for the introduction, 10% for the conclusion, and then the rest will be in the main body, which is going to be 80% of the... It could be roughly around that. It doesn't have to be exactly that. But this is how you can manage your words as well, so that you don't have a really, really long introduction, and then you're starting to go over the word count, and then you don't know what to do, how to cut it down. Or if you feel like you have too little words, then maybe you see that the introduction is 10%, so maybe you don't have to make the introduction bigger. It's just the problem is in the main body, for example. With the planning, you can say, I plan on writing 1,000 words by the end of this. So this is how you can then have smart objectives or smart planning tasks. So you can say, I want to write 500 words on this. 1,000 words on this. This is how you can then divide your report and the writing of that report to make it more clear, and it just then flows easier when you do it that way. If you use an image or a table from a source, you have to reference this picture. Write it at the bottom of the, so you have to label try to label any image or table that you use. Give it a title, give it something, and mention where you took it from. So this is a part of the book. This is showing, it's like figure 1.-7. So you see photos supplied courtesy of SKB Sweden. You have to mention where you took this photo from. Reference it. Okay. Mention this photo or table in your report. So you can say, as you can see from figure 1, the color of whatever is blue. Doesn't matter. But don't just add a photo without actually talking about it in the text. So the text should be reliable whether the photo's there or not. You shouldn't have just a photo without any context. Also, it's good to mention why you chose to show this photo in your log. Any type of information like that, try to justify anything that you find or see. So don't just add a photo without any explanation. So I remember I did a mistake where I had a submission and I had the first cover photo. I added a photo at the back and I made it blurry. So just to like have a, like this kind of thing. So you see how they've used a photo here. Mention where you took this photo from. This is actually really important. Okay, now with the writing and the outline, you have the report type. So you have the scientific or discussion based. Some of you have some scientific topics and some of you have discussion based. So basically with the scientific one is you have a hypothesis, you're gathering information to confirm or reject this hypothesis. You don't have to do an experiment for that. It's basically more factual. So if you're talking about a certain disease, scientific. So it's not an opinion. With the other one, the discussion-based one, it's an opinion. So let's say it's philosophy. You want to talk about something. So some of you do have a discussion-based project. So it's like you have to then say, Pluto said this. Is it Pluto? Yeah, like philosopher A had this opinion. Philosopher B disagrees with this opinion, said this, and then you have to summarize all the opinions and then discuss them. It's different than the scientific one because the scientific one is more factual and direct. So with these two types, you then have different outlines. The abstract, so I've added that abstract for both of the types, scientific and discussion based. An abstract is optional. If you want to know more about the abstract, or even here you have the introduction, you have the conclusion. Page 91 of the book is very important. It discusses this page. It discusses the abstract. What is an abstract? An introduction. What should you include in the introduction? Conclusion, referencing. You can also read more about examples of abstracts from the articles that I've given you. Any article and journal, they should have an abstract. So, as you know, when you research, you shouldn't spend so much time reading the full report or the full article that you're using as a reference, or the full book. You don't have to read the whole thing. It's about skim reading. That comes with time. It gets easier with time. But you have to basically see which parts of the book. So I have this book. I've used it for work many times, but I have never read the whole thing. You don't have to start with the first page. I usually go on the contents page, scan it roughly. If it's an article, you also don't have to read the full article fully. You go to the abstract. You read the abstract. The abstract should summarize everything. The final conclusion at the beginning. You choose to add it if you want for your report, so that if I want to read your whole thing, I can read the abstract first, see if it concerns me. I don't have to read the whole thing unless I'm interested. The abstract, you can choose to add it if you feel like say you don't have much words, like you're struggling with the number of words, then you can choose to add an abstract. Other than that, it's not really necessary. So yeah, with scientific, you have the abstract and the introduction, then you review research of secondary data that you've collected. You review what the hypothesis is, and then you can then do collection of data, whether it's the primary, your experiment, or collection of like actual secondary sources. Then you can do the analysis of the data. You can discuss it and conclude it, bibliography. With a discussion based, you have to do the introduction and then the literature review. This is what we call it. You can Google what literature review means as well. But it's basically reviewing literature. This is literature. So anything that's published. So you want to review what people are saying in these literature. Okay, and then you discuss it, then you conclude.
This is an optional outline. You can choose to follow this exactly, or you can choose to do something else. So what I did with my dissertation as well is I did introduction, chapter 1, types of contaminants, if you remember. Chapter 2, effects of these contaminants. Chapter 3, remediation methods. There should have been a chapter 4 of doing something evaluative, because I didn't do much evaluation. You can have different sections. It doesn't have to follow this exactly, and you can have argument 1, argument 2, and then in the argument 1, you have a subheading of advantages of this argument, disadvantages of this argument, and you can do the same thing with the other one, or even discussion of the argument, that kind of thing. So you can, that's up to you. You divide it however way you want. At the end, when you reach the conclusion should be based on evidence that you've provided so far. So you shouldn't conclude something that you've never mentioned or that you haven't mentioned in your report. It has to be something based on what you've discussed and analyzed so far. If we want to go back to the concrete analogy, you can't just be like, yes, the concrete breaks at this specific stress without explaining or even mentioning this stress before. And actually, it has to be justified. It has to make sense. So try to make sure that your conclusion makes sense with what you've been saying. And it has to answer the question that you've posed at the beginning of the research, whether it's in the title or the aim. A suggestion for how your conclusion should look like, I suggest you read the Exemplar A-star guy. He has a really good conclusion, where basically so again, it's 10% of the wording. What do you say in these 10%? You shouldn't just have, you can literally have a conclusion where it's just one sentence explaining what the result is, what you think the conclusion is, this is better, that. But the best way of doing it is you introduce the question. So you mention the question that you've mentioned in the introduction again. So you mention, okay, so this report was meant to discuss, to see if this is better than this in this topic. And then you write the summary of reasons for one side. So why you think drugs are better. And then you say why you think drugs are not better to treat dementia. And then you mention the summary of reasons for the other side. And then you mention the counter arguments of the other side. So you're basically summarizing the whole thing. That's why when I tell you, when I read something, I read just the conclusion. I read the abstract and then read the conclusion. And then if I wanted to, I read the analysis. Introduction is optional as well. Introduction is usually descriptive and it's not really any new information if you're an expert in this certain topic. Yeah, and then you make the main conclusion, which argument you actually are siding with and why. And then you can, as an optional thing, you add a final statement demonstrating mastery. So the final statement of like showing how confident you are in this conclusion. Now, also, what you can do for now is research. You have additional tools. So you have the argument map and you have argument flaws. There's so much information about this that you can find to try to see if you have a legitimate argument. So basically, sometimes when you're discussing a certain thing, you realize, oh, I have a certain piece of information that I don't have, or I have something lacking in my argument that it's not making sense, or I'm saying, this is wrong, but I don't know why. So then you have something missing, so you have to go back and do some more research. To check that you don't have that kind of issue, you can do an argument map. And you can then see, if you're reading a certain person's argument, you can see its flaws. So you have to discuss why you think this secondary source was wrong, for example, or you think their argument is weak, especially if it's discussion based. If you're talking about something in a philosophy or something, and it's a certain person, if it's a certain person discussing their personal opinion, you can then see that there could be some sort of flaw in their argument that doesn't really make sense to you. There are many examples of argument flaws that you can also Google. Remember the assessment objectives. It's very important that you keep reminding yourself of the assessment objectives, especially here. They have a lot of information on the assessment objectives. We've discussed the first objective, the assessment objective. We've discussed the second one. The fifth one we'll discuss later, but now I feel like I just wanted to go through the third and the fourth one, just to give you some more information. The third one is about research. So it's about why you've selected so how you've done the research, where you've chosen to look at. So there are so many books regarding your topic, I'm sure, or articles. Why have you chosen these specific ones? Even if it's because you couldn't go to a library, you didn't have access online to certain sources. So these are the sources that you had access to. That's justification. So, but even more so, why do you think this book was better than that book? Maybe this specific author is more reliable. Explain that kind of selection. Why have you chosen to select this source over that source? Then you're gonna end up with so many sources. Try from the ones that you've selected, organize them, take notes. Someone came to join us in our session because he was feeling lonely. Why is he looking at himself? Why are you looking at yourself? Okay, so note taking is very important. See, I took notes to tell you about note taking, so it's highly recommended. So when you're organizing your sources, you have to try to keep reminding yourself. So you could read something, a piece of information, and then when you have to write, you forget what you wanted to write about, or you forget what your opinion was. So it's important to take notes, to be like, okay, this source I can use for argument 1 to show the weaknesses of the argument. Or I can use it to show how the argument is actually a good argument. Where do you want to go? Stay. Yeah. So with note taking, it helps you to save time. So instead of reading the whole article again and again and again, you take certain notes that you think is important from reading it just that one time, and then you can go back to your notes. It helps you understand your argument. You have to keep a record of your sources. You have to take notes of the sources that you're reading, because when you write at the end and you don't, this is referring back to what I said at the beginning of the session, is you have to have some sort of reference to go back to in case you lose a certain reference, or you've written something. This will be very time consuming if you actually you're distracting. This is what's happening right now. Lovely. Wow, I forgot what I wanted to say. Yeah, so it's good to summarize each and every resource. That could save you a lot of time later on, and it could be very helpful to keep track of everything. Then another step with AO3 is to scrutinize, basically evaluating your sources. Mention why you think this source is more reliable, more or better than this source. Why do you think you should rely on this when they both say different things, for example? Range, or you have a variety. It's obvious that what you're searching for is not biased. So let's say you're just using a certain information from a certain author or a certain organization, then it might not be, if the organization is reliable, then it's fine. But the point is, if you're not trying to be, if you're showing that more than one source is discussing the same argument, right? Here we go. You will lose credit through the AO3 if your range of sources is not really wide, if you don't have a range or a variety of sources. So be careful with that. Now for the AO4, it's about implementing a project plan. If you've written a good project plan, try to make it as detailed as possible. More guidance here. And if you do the analysis of your research. So just collecting information and using that without analyzing and discussing, I think this source was actually better than this source, or analyzing your resources. So so you're discussing, for example, this source and this source, how strong is their evidence? So if you feel like this secondary source is kind of iffy, mention that. So it's not about just collecting information. It's about also analyzing this information that you're collecting, that you've collected, to see if it's actually reliable or not. It's going back to this slide. Okay, AO4 is also about arranging these findings into 5,000 word report with references and a bibliography, and the conclusion, communicate these outcomes in a report and a presentation. All of that is regarding the AO4. 40% of the whole IPQ. Then you have AO5, which we will discuss later. It's about the better your project plan is, the better your reviewing for AO5 will be. If your project plan is actually really weak or not as detailed, then you won't be able to review it easily. So say like, oh, I was over optimistic here, I didn't do it as better here as well here, I should have done this, I should have planned more, I should have given more time here, I should have, that kind of thing, with justification and thinking why you didn't consider, you forgot to consider that you had externals, you forgot that you had a birthday that you wanted to go to, whatever. Mention these type of information, as much detail as you can. Exemplar, A star, he did a reviewing of his plan. You can also check that out. I think we're done. Say bye, boo boo. Hey. Hey. Hey.
What do you do with the proposals? What do you do with the proposals? Oh, research paper and writing. But so you need to this analysis. Okay, wow, lost train of thought. Okay, maybe that's actually kind of controversial, so maybe I shouldn't say that.
What is it called? I don't have to read exactly what you've done, but if you couldn't go to school to. Wow, I forgot what I wanted to say. Discussing their opinion. Or
what was the point of me saying that? I don't even remember right now. This is so awkward.